Before we get started, give this video a like and subscribe if this kind of deep dive storytelling is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? The photograph is old, its corners curled and browning with age, the sepia ink faded by decades of sunlight, dust, and touch. It sits nestled in an envelope, half remembered, half forgotten, at the bottom of a dresser drawer in a house much like any other in northern Pennsylvania. The portrait is plain, simple, yet it commands attention. In it, a young girl sits perched on a wooden chair. She cannot be more than 6. Her dress, pressed and proper, falls just short of her knees, the fabric notably lighter by the right sleeve, where a sunbeam must have found it again and again. Her hair, caught between curls and tangles, is held back by a neat blue ribbon. She smiles, a smile that quivers somewhere between mischief and shyness, a fleeting glimmer of childhood dreams. Pause and look into her eyes. They are wide, searching, carrying that uncanny knowingness found only in children, a sense that the world is much stranger, and perhaps far less safe, than the grown-ups let on. This is Marjorie West, born in a time when the world seemed defined by loss, when families stitched together happiness from the worn cloth of hard times and hope. The year is 1938, a year that slides easily across the tongue, another number in an endless sepia calendar. But to the people of McKean County, it is the year the woods swallowed a little girl, and time itself grew gnarled and secretive. At the breaking edge of the Allegheny Mountains, where sharp hills rise ragged against flannel-gray skies, there is a hush that settles across the land with the dusk. Old lumber towns, battered by the Great Depression, cling to these ridges. Steam trains groan and wind along deep ravines, hauling timber out of the endless trees. Life here is quiet but not peaceful. For every neighborly greeting there lies an underlying tension, a sense that poverty and hardship are always just a broken axle away. Marjorie's family, the Wests, are ordinary people. Sheridan West, her father, is a foreman at an oil field, large, thick-fingered, and honest as the day is long. Cecilia, her mother, is composed, severe in repose, yet tender with her 2 daughters. There is Dorothea, the older sister at 11, tall for her age and always careful not to let her hair get tangled in the wind. Marjorie is the youngest, the precious one, the child who still sits on her mother's lap at church, who brings violets from the lawn to the kitchen table, who chases dragonflies behind the shed and giggles purely, wholly, the way children do only before the world lays its plans for them. McKean counties would spill endlessly east and west. In spring, the undergrowth swells, a riot of green riddled with wildflowers, ferns, and the curling fragrance of pine. The weekends, for families like the Wests, are rare respites from work, a Sunday drive, a church potluck, or, if the weather allows, a picnic at the edge of the forest. Beyond the tidy squares of Marshburg and Lewis Run, the woods offer escape, and perhaps, for the children, a sense of adventure. Ask anyone who grew up in these hills what the woods mean to them, and they will tell you of secrets, of deer trails covered in moss, of cold springs bubbling beside half-rotted logs, of places where the air cools abruptly and the wind whispers things the living would do well not to repeat. The forest here is ageless, a tangle of shadow and memory, holding on to every story whether anyone wishes it or not. May 8th, 1938. Mother's Day. The Wests rise before dawn. Sheridan dresses in his Sunday shirt, packs the battered Model A Ford with baskets, cold ham, slices of rhubarb pie, boiled eggs, a small lemon cake Cecilia baked the night before. Marjorie is awake early, rubbing sleep from her eyes, excited in that way only a child can be. For her, the day is adventure, promise, and delight, a world without endings. They drive out of town, past the gas station and the boarded-up diner, winding their way up the hills in a cacophony of gear shifts and laughter. The morning is cool, the light sifted through low clouds that threaten, briefly, to break. But the clouds hold, and the Wests find their spot, a glade not far from White Gravel Road, where the trees allow the sun to play on the damp earth, and wild violets color the grass with tiny bursts of purple. Cecilia lays out the spread as Sheridan clusters logs and arranges seats fashioned from old oil barrels and sanded planks. Dorothea and Marjorie tumble into the meadow, shrieking with laughter, fingers sticky from hard candy. In one hand, Marjorie clutches a posy of violets, crushed at the stems, but beautiful nonetheless. Through the hush of the woods, the voices travel. Sound here is swallowed, pushed down into the sod and duff. The stillness is almost absolute, a natural silence not of peace, but of expectation. Beyond the neat arrangement of picnic baskets and blankets, the unknown stirs, watchful and patient. And there, in that moment caught forever in memory and photograph, Marjorie is just a girl. Her future a blank page. No one knows what the day will bring. No one ever does. Tragedy, like the snap of a twig underfoot, comes silently, unannounced, a terror masked by the ordinary. Before the end of the day, that laughter will shatter. The West family will be changed, unmoored from all that was safe and familiar. The woods will claim a secret, and a mystery will begin, one destined to shape and haunt not just a single family, but an entire region, a nation battered by anxiety and loss. The photograph lingers, a testament, a warning, an ache. Look closely and you will see it. A girl on the edge of forever, a smile not yet touched by fear, framed by the wild and endless woods. The world she knew, the world that shaped her, poised to dissolve in a single, irreversible instant. Marjorie West. A name, a face, a question whispered through pine needles and across campfire embers. The case that sets seasoned searchers to shudder, that lingers in the hollow where hope once lay breathing. In these hills, the past is never far away. Night comes early, shadows gather deep, and in the glens where the wild violets grow, her name is still spoken, in love, in sorrow, in fear. What happened to Marjorie? In the heart of Pennsylvania's wilderness, the cards of fate were shuffled and a hand was dealt cruelly, without warning or reason. Somewhere in the lines of that old photograph, between the innocence and the ache, the story waits. The woods keep their secrets. The story begins. It was Mother's Day, May 8th, 1938, a year already burdened with the heavy sighs of the Great Depression, but not without tenderness. In McKean County, Pennsylvania, where the ground rises in ancient shelves of green and the woods are dense enough to make grown men superstitious, the West family rose quietly in their modest home on Arnold Avenue, just outside Bradford. Sheridan West woke first, as men of his kind did, with a soft grunt and a look at the window where the pale light of a thin spring sun pressed in. Cecilia stirred beside him, her thoughts already with her chores, her children, her sense of time's quick passage. Today, though, was to be different, a day without work, a rare oasis of peace and promise, cut from the fabric of ordinary hardship by ritual. Mother's Day, and by the simple hunger for joy. Their daughters, Dorothea and Marjorie, came blinking down the stairs, hair mussed, cheeks flushed by dreams they would never quite recall. For Dorothea, almost 12, the world was growing complicated, school, secrets, the awkward gravity of adolescence. For Marjorie, barely 6, the world was still magic. Each morning a small revelation, each walk in the woods a new adventure. She wore a pink dress for the occasion, one her mother had sewn by lamplight, trimming the sleeves with care and attaching a blue ribbon that would catch the morning sun like a droplet of sky. The Model A Ford, battered and speckled mud-brown by 1,000 journeys, waited at the curb. Sheridan loaded a wicker basket with a practiced hand. Boiled eggs, ham, slices of bread, a mason jar filled with lemonade, Cecilia's lemon cake, and a batch of cookies for the girls. The smell of baked sugar and citrus brightened the kitchen. Cecilia's last touch, crisp white napkins, folded just so. The roads out of Bradford curved narrow and steep, cutting into the wooded hills. The air outside still held spring frost, but the promise of warmth rode the breeze. As they drove, clipped wheels echoing against stone-lined culverts, the girls pressed their faces against the window, pointing out where deer might cross, where spring trickled silver beneath a fallen log. Conversation drifted, Sheridan recounting a story of his boyhood, Cecilia recalling the last year's picnic, Dorothea arching an eyebrow in quiet skepticism, and Marjorie, bouncing beside her sister, talking through her list of things she wanted to see: ferns, wildflowers, maybe a turtle. By late morning, they reached Marshburg, a hamlet dwarfed by the encroaching woods, where smoke curled from scattered cabins and the winding ribbon of white gravel road disappeared into deep, beckoning shadow. Sheridan parked on a rutted stretch beside the tree line. In every direction, trees pressed close, their branches filtering sunlight into gentle dapples across the forest floor. There were dogwoods in bloom, white as handkerchiefs, and carpets of wild violets nodding their heads in the wind. They gathered their things, Dorothea holding the cake, Marjorie clutching a faded rag doll beneath her arm. Sheridan found a likely spot, a small meadow rimmed with pines, where the grass was thick and forgiving, where one could imagine the world pausing, breathless, just for them. Unpacking became a ritual, each member of the family performing their role without words. Sheridan unfurling the tartan blanket with a showy snap, Cecilia smoothing it, straightening the corners, arranging baskets with a mother's sense of order. Dorothea, reluctant at first to set aside her childish things in favor of responsibility, relented under her mother's steady gaze and began helping Marjorie gather flowers. There was laughter, high and clean, the clink of utensils, the muted crunch of bread, the tang of lemonade cold on the tongue. At intervals, the wind shifted, bringing the scent of pine and fresh earth, a reminder of the untamable wild just beyond their encampment. Marjorie darted between the edge of the meadow and the trees, her small hands already stained green, pressing violets into a bouquet for her mother. "We'll get the prettiest ones this year," she promised, eyes bright with genuine conviction. Sheridan lay back, hands behind his head, watching the clouds scroll past. For a moment, even he, sturdy and stoic, felt the weight of the years lift. Here, in this suspended pocket of peace, the world's troubles shrank to inconsequence. No talk of layoffs, no radio murmurs of distant conflict, no threats from beyond the woods. Only the now, the chorus of insects, the far-off call of a morning dove. Cecilia fussed with Dorothea's hair, smoothing a wild curl that would not be tamed, then fussed with Marjorie's, though the younger girl slipped away before much could be done. "Come back here," Cecilia laughed, her voice echoing beneath the arch of branches. "We're not ready to eat yet." The West's picnic lay at the outer edge of routine. What made it special was not the cake, nor the day, but the feeling, shared, unspoken, that everything precious might last if only hope was held onto tightly enough. Marjorie eyed the blooming dogwoods encroaching from the edge of the woods. "I'm going to get more violets," she declared, skipping off, already plotting her route among the hummocks. Dorothea followed, less eager but unable to resist her sister's infectious delight. Cecilia and Sheridan watched them go, confident that the girls were safe in a world they'd always known, a world bounded by their love, their vigilance, their belief that nothing could really go wrong on a day like this. For Sheridan, there was a rare, crushing softness in the moment. He surveyed his family, these women, strong and full of laughter, wondered what lay ahead for them. He could not have known how quickly even such small perfections might be broken. In the heat of midday, the world seemed to hold its breath. Shadows softened. The air smelled of sap and sweetness, mud and memory. Dorothea and Marjorie squabbled softly over who had found the nicest ones, then made up with shared giggles as they watched a swallowtail butterfly tumble between sunbeams. Time drifted, stretching, elongating, as if the woods themselves wished never to let go of this scene. Nearby, the brook hurtled smooth stones along its course, hidden but not far. Pikestaffs of sunlight reached through the branches, and the whole forest seemed momentarily cleansed of trouble. The West were not a family of means, but on this Mother's Day, they had more than enough. The future, unknown, was as yet unwritten. Encircled by love and green abundance, Marjorie's pink dress blazed among the violets as a small gesture of defiant joy, a beacon for happiness, and, soon enough, for grief. For now, there was only laughter and the scent of pine, the urgent joy of a child with a handful of wildflowers, and beneath it all, an uneasy, hidden cadence, the silent, patient force of the woods, waiting to reclaim its territory. For Marjorie West, the world was filtered through shades of pink and blue, sunshine and fleeting shadows. Innocence begged to be preserved, but never caged. She was 6 years old and wore her favorite dress, a pink frock trimmed with thoughtful stitches, the kind only a mother could make, its gentle hue made brighter by the honest daylight that broke through the jeweled green canopy overhead. In her red hair, a blue ribbon held court, refusing to relinquish its cheerful grip despite all of Marjorie's skips and touzles. She was small for her age, but fleet-footed, quick to giggle, and quicker still to spot the delicate wild violets pushing their faces from the leaf-molded earth. The picnic blanket, a tartan worn soft by years of use, was spread at the edge of the meadow where the wildwoods crouched, ancient and immense. Here, birds played their mysterious games, darting like arrows between shafts of silver sun. Their calls rose and fell, merging with the laughter of the two West girls as they tumbled together, untamed, their voices carrying across the clearing and into the indifferent woods. It was still hours until noon, but already the drowsy hum of insects was gathering behind the chorus of robins and chickadees. The wind was mild, a murmur, nothing more, not yet the warning it one day would become. Dorothea, nearly 12, tried her best to feign composure, to act the part of the guardian elder. She tugged at Marjorie's hand, guiding her away from brambles and the plush, gnarled roots that snaked across the ground like wooden whispers. "Watch where you step, Margie," she cautioned, but Marjorie only grinned and darted ahead, the skirt of her dress flaring pink around her knees. Behind them, Sheridan busied himself with the family's old picnic basket, kneeling to arrange lemon cake and sandwiches beside cool jars of lemonade. He was a man of quiet habits and steady nerves, hands made rough by years in the oil fields. But here, in the gentle green embrace of the woods, he allowed his shoulders to unclench. Cecilia, vigilant in her own measured way, watched her daughters from the corner of her eye as she set out plates, smoothing the tartan, making order from details too small for her husband or children to notice. The promise of this day had blossomed in Marjorie's mind since dawn, the picnic an event lucky enough to have landed upon Mother's Day, an excuse for flowers and joy, and perhaps, if she was good, a ragged bouquet pressed into her mother's waiting hands. She knelt, tiny knees staining, and gathered violets with remarkable focus, pausing now and then to glance up at her sister or at the shifting white space between trees, where sunlight collected in puddles on the moss. "Dorothy, look what I found," she cried, her voice chiming like a bell across the hush. In her palm, a cluster of violets, their color impossibly deep. "Let's get more. Maybe we'll find some with 3 colors, like in the book, remember?" Dorothea, half distracted and half surrendered to the moment, offered an indulgent smile and stooped to help. For a time, there was only the quiet work of gathering, the occasional complaint about ants or prickles, and the way their hands, small and large, moved through the grass as if rehearsing an old, familiar dance. The woods loomed close. These were the Alleghenies, primeval, brooding, forever crowding against the limits of settlement. Even as they laughed, the West sisters remained within sight of the picnic blanket, a parental mandate never questioned, the result of caution born from stories told on darkening porches. Don't wander past the trees. Don't lose sight of home. This was a rule as immutable as the forest itself. Yet children live in elastic worlds. Distances expand unmeasured. Boundaries slip softly, unnoticed, as imagination takes hold. Marjorie, emboldened by her sister's proximity and her trust in the invisible perimeters set by family, followed a violet's pale flutter a few steps farther. She stooped, plucked, squinted at a sunbeam slicing through branches, and called again to Dorothea, her words scattering in the soft light. Elsewhere, grown-ups murmured about cake and cold lemonade, poured coffee into tin cups, talked quietly, their voices marked by the easy contentment of a Sunday without chores. No one noticed how the forest seemed to draw closer whenever someone looked away. No one sensed how the ordinary could so quickly slip into the irreversible. Above, crows passed, dark, indifferent, as if all of nature had agreed to take no special notice of the two girls threading their way between flowers and fallen logs. The world was indifferent, yes, but the West family's corner of it, for now, was still safe, still sanctified by ritual and habit, and by the sibling bond that tethered them close. Marjorie rose, her bouquet grown wild and unruly, and wiped a muddy knuckle absently on the hem of her pink dress. She peered back toward the spread blanket, where her mother and father moved in miniature, unaware. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, unsure if she should double back or keep hunting for that three-color violet her imagination insisted must be hidden somewhere beyond a patch of ferns. The sun caught her ribbon, a flash of blue among all the green. "Dorothea, do you think Mama will like these?" she asked, holding her clump of violets awkwardly, violet stems bent and already wilting. Dorothea, in that way older siblings do, offered a half-committed hum of approval and motioned for her to stay close. "Don't go far, Margie. Dad says there are snakes in the brush, remember?" But the brush was behind them, the danger theoretical, the only thing stirring the faint buzz of insects and the ever-present drift of pollen. A woodpecker hammered in the mid-distance, its rhythm reassuring, like the tick of a clock somewhere in the House of Woods. The minutes stretched as noon approached, slow, deliberate. Somewhere in the blanket's corner, Cecilia smiled knowingly at the girl's flower collection, the subtle worry line between her brows easing for perhaps the first time in weeks. Sheridan unbuttoned his cuffs, content to let the girls roam as long as their laughter remained within earshot. To anyone watching, the scene would have been ordinary, beautiful even, a tableau of family domesticity wrapped in the mystery of untamed land. But as the trees pressed close, absorbing each note of laughter, an ancient indifference persisted. Nature does not care for innocence. It only honors what endures. The light shifted. A single cloud scudded across the sun, throwing the meadow into brief, dappled shadow. Marjorie skipped ahead to snatch one final violet, a pink blur against the deepening green. She glanced over her shoulder, found Dorothea within a few paces, and grinned, unconcerned by the silence that followed. Behind them, at the limits of the meadow, time moved forward without mercy. Closer and closer, the clock would tick its way to noon, and the space between being watched and being lost, so slim, so silent, would close with it. For now, though, Marjorie, small and vibrant, played in her pink dress while the woods remained silent and the family's laughter shimmered above the wild violets, a fragile barricade against the indifferent wild. The sun climbed higher, pressing warmth into the forest clearing, a gentle heat that sifted lazily through the towering pines and mapped shifting patterns on the verdant carpet beneath. Marjorie West, in her pink dress and with her blue ribbon tied neatly, had been so full of life and light in the hours before noon. She danced and bent close to the earth, searching for the perfect wildflower to carry back to her mother, a sacred ritual in her young mind. The woods had cradled her laughter, a melody tangled with birdsong, and for a while, it felt as though nothing could reach this bubble of innocence. But then, in an instant no one saw coming, that bright thread slipped away. "I was just picking flowers for Mama," Marjorie had told her sister moments earlier. Her voice was soft but certain, a small declaration of love. Dorothea, older and more cautious, had watched her sister wander a little farther from their shared spot. No more than 50 yards, Dorothea would recall later, the distance between safety and vanishing. It was a space measured in heartbeats, not miles, yet it became endless. The girl's tiny footsteps were light as they crept closer to the shade, to the thickets where violets clustered beneath half-fallen logs. She stooped, ran fingers along tender stems, and tried to gather blossoms into a bouquet large enough to rival the one in the old picture books she adored. But when she turned to call Dorothea again, she was nowhere in sight. Minutes stretched into something unmeasurable. Dorothea's playful tone turned urgent as she called out, "Marjorie?" Her voice trembled, a thin thread unraveling in the heavy stillness. Another call, louder. "Marjorie, come back." The family's silence fractured like broken glass. Sheridan and Cecilia, busy unloading the last of the food, heard the sudden calling and froze. It was not the game or spirited adventure they had expected. Their voices, deep and authoritative, soon joined the chorus, calling the child's name until the forest swallowed the sound whole. The thick underbrush, the towering trees, the wildflowers, the very earth itself seemed to swallow her, invisible and unyielding. "She was just here," Cecilia whispered, voice tight with disbelief and growing dread as she scanned the shadowed fringes. Her gaze fixed on a patch where Marjorie had been only moments before, where the pink dress dusted with flower petals should have been, but no longer was. The wind stirred, catching a wayward leaf that flicked across her face like a ghost's caress. No footprints apart from the two girls. No signs of struggle. No broken branches or dragged earth. Just the silent, unyielding wilderness pressing in on all sides. It was as if the mountains themselves had stretched, closed the distance, and taken the child whole. Sheridan stepped forward, voice breaking. "Marjorie? Sweetheart, where are you?" His eyes combed the thickening woods, hoping against reason that she might be crouched behind a tree, playing her little game of hide and seek. He imagined her face, shining with innocence, framed by tangled curls. The same face that filled family albums, now vanished from the living world in a devilish blink. Dorothea's eyes filled with tears as the realization sank cold and heavy into the bones of the family. "I thought she would never leave the blanket," she murmured. "She said she was coming back." But the woods answered only with silence. All around, the family and nearby neighbors gathered, their panic sharp and immediate. The dappled light faded under gathering cloud, and the once welcoming forest took on a towering, accusing tone. Calls for the child echoed endlessly, swallowed by thick timbers, until voices grew hoarse and raw. Searchers pressed closer to the trees, hands trembling as they brushed through bracken, hearts pounding against ribs as if to keep pace with the growing panic. Yet every effort met only the wild green shadows and the frozen quiet of branches. The air hung still, as if waiting for something that might never come. It wasn't just that Marjorie was missing. It was that she disappeared without a trace, without struggle, without warning. That a girl, glowing in pink beneath a ribbon of blue, could vanish beneath the patient watch of her family, and the indifferent sweep of woodland opened a yawning abyss. "She was right there," Cecilia repeated over and over, voice hollow, "right there picking flowers." But the flowers lay untouched beyond her last step, the ground as undisturbed as before the day began. The forest showed none of its secrets. In that moment, the forest seemed to mock them, unchanging, eternal, and cold, an indifferent witness to the unraveling nightmare that had just begun. And as the West family's calls dissolved into the trees like thin smoke in the wind, a terrifying truth settled. Marjorie West had vanished into the wilds, swallowed whole by silence and shadow, and for all the searchers' cries, the forest offered no answer. With the sun now high, the picnic forgotten, the day that had begun in joy was irrevocably fractured. The forest, once a place of laughter and light, had drawn a line in the earth, and Marjorie had crossed it never to return. Sheridan West's voice boomed across the ridges, raw with rising panic that soon morphed into frantic hysteria. "Marjorie! Marjorie! Where are you?" he shouted, his calls ripping through the thick canopy of pines and birch, echoing against the ancient trunks as dusk crept close, cold and indifferent to the family's growing terror. The sun was sinking behind ragged hills, its orange glow swallowed gradually by gathering shadows. The forest seemed to close in, swallowing sound and hope alike. Dorothea ran breathless, her small chest heaving from desperation rather than exertion. Tears carved clean tracks down dirt-smudged cheeks as she burst back to where her parents were finishing the picnic preparations. She's gone. The words struck like a thunderclap, fragmenting the last fragile calm. Marjorie's gone. In that fragmented instant, all the steadfast assurances of the morning shattered. The sisters were inseparable, the family tightly bound. It was impossible to imagine Marjorie wandering far or alone. Yet here they were, fractured by loss in a wilderness that seemed immeasurable. Instinct seized them all. The West family snapped into frantic motion, each person setting out in different directions with shaking hands to scour underbrush, peer behind tangled trees, search hollowed logs and shadowed ravines. Men and women from nearby farms and towns poured into the gathering, lanterns held aloft like beacons against night's advance, their voices joining in a chorus of despair and hope tangled together. "We have to find her." Cecilia's voice cracked over the din, fingers white as they gripped Sheridan's arm, her heart breaking with every step taken into the unknown. Sweat mingled with fear. The forest floor, thick with moss and fallen needles, swallowed footprints almost as fast as they were made. Calls sounded hollow and weak between the dense trunks. The older pines swayed without wind, their limbs creaking as if murmuring secrets too old to speak aloud. Sheridan's mind raced, his years as a foreman in the oil fields giving way to primal dread and urgency. He instructed searchers in clipped commands: check the ridge line, follow the creek bed downstream, circle around to the logging road. Every direction, every shadow was suspect. Dorothea, though young, steeled herself to join the search, clutching her mother's hand briefly before setting off on her own. She moved with determination born of terror, but growing disbelief crept beneath her steps. Could Marjorie simply vanish without a trace? The question churned like a stone in a mule's hoof, unsettling and unyielding. By late afternoon, the initial shock transformed into panic as hopes waned beneath the growing cover of twilight. The forest was vast and ancient, deep with hidden hollows and steep ravines that could conceal a child with terrifying ease. The scent of pine and earth mingled with the acrid tang of fear, thickening the air. The first searchers spoke of impossible silence. No rustling, no cry, no sign to mark the girl's passage. The woods seemed complicit in denial, closed off and mute. Each call for Marjorie was met by an emptiness that pressed harder, squeezing the breath from chests and the strength from hearts. As dusk bled into night, the search tightened into a desperate hunt by lantern light. Men and women strained their eyes against the darkness, calls now hoarse and rhythmic, a litany born of hope and despair intertwined. The wind rose, a cold breath weaving through the trees, rattling dead leaves and stirring unease. Sheridan stood on a ridge, voice raw from shouting, eyes scanning every flicker of movement, every shadow writhed by lantern flame. Somewhere in the distance, dogs bayed and barked, paws clawing damp earth, noses sniffing the ghost trails a child might leave. Cecilia's knees buckled briefly, hands clasped over her mouth to stifle a scream. The idea that her youngest could disappear, her little girl who picked flowers and giggled and brought violets, was a poison that spread through her veins. "Search every inch," Sheridan ordered, voice cutting through the clamor. She couldn't have gotten far, but the forest was patient, indifferent to human urgency, its depths impenetrable and mute. Streams murmured softly, old logs creaked beneath the weight of night, and unseen eyes watched with cold detachment as families unraveled and hope began to fray. Night swallowed the picnic site and the flickering searchlights, turning hills and hollows into a vast black sea. The West family huddled together briefly, whispering desperate plans, each heart beating a wild drum of fear and guilt. Somewhere, beneath the solemn pines, Marjorie West had vanished, her pink dress and blue ribbon swallowed into legend by a forest that gave no answers and showed no mercy. The forest, ancient and unmoved, pressed in around them as the light died slowly in the west. A fiery gold dipped behind the crests of the Allegheny Hills and was swallowed by creeping dusk, leaving behind hornet-colored haze and long, trembling shadows. Still no trace of Marjorie West. The word missing does not capture the way a child disappears. It is not simply gone. It is unmoored, unreal, a rift opened in the tightly stitched fabric of an ordinary day. 1 second she had been there, a pink dress swirling like a wildflower among wildflowers, and then nothing. The breeze rose in a cold exhale, like the mountains themselves were phantoms, collectively holding their breath. As the minutes mounted toward the collapsing edge of dusk, the West had already sounded every imaginable cry, each shout cutting less sharply through the thickening air. But more voices joined them. Others had heard. First came the Smiths from up the ridge, then the Millers, the Shellbards, even the postmaster from the Marshburg General Store, his wiry frame lit by the bobbing ether of a carbide lantern. Word traveled quickly in isolated Pennsylvania towns. By 6:30 p.m., more than 24 had gathered, including several civilian Conservation Corps boys from a nearby camp. Some were shirtless beneath overalls, their boots slick with moss and terror. None knew Marjorie, not really. They all came anyway. I heard she was just here, someone whispered. She was wearing pink, another murmured. Those already searching didn't respond. Sweat darkened their shirts. Their hands bled from thorns. The forest had taken her. This simple and absurd fact. And now it would take their fear too, digesting each man and woman piece by piece as the darkness wrapped thicker. Sheridan moved like a ghost among them, jaw clenched, sleeves rolled, refusing to give way to the breaking horror creeping up his spine. His voice, gone hoarse 2 hours before from shouting, had diminished to little more than a strained rasp. He clutched a flashlight in one hand, sweeping its beam desperately across the tree trunks, over fallen logs, into rocky creases where a small body could lie unseen. Each second without Marjorie begot new and terrible possibilities. Keep calling her, someone said. Keep her name on the wind. And so they did, hundreds of times. Marjorie. Margie. Sweet girl. The name lost shape, too crystalline at first, almost holy. Then, as hours ground on, it became jagged, hollow, a trembling invocation hurled into a cosmic silence that felt suffocating. As full dark arrived, the lanterns multiplied like fireflies possessed with panic. Their light shimmered along trails never meant to be traveled after sundown. Men swung axes left and right through tangled underbrush, cleared only hours earlier by deer. Women, some barefoot, waded into marshy bursts of standing water, hoping Marjorie had just veered off and grown tired, curled beneath a rock or bush until someone came. Her name was whispered, pleaded, cried. But the forest gave nothing back. No sobs, no flutter of taffeta, no sweet child's reply. Dogs barked in the distance. Once, then again. A volunteer had brought bloodhounds from as far as Kane, but their noses, slick with rain from earlier that week, caught no scent worth following. They grew distressed, then directionless, circling their handlers as if spinning prayers into the leaf mold. The footprints near the picnic site, sandwiched between Dorothea's tennis shoes and Sheridan's boots, were old now, indistinct. The place where she had last been seen was no longer sacred. Just earth again. By nightfall, while over 100 had assembled in the trees, eyes straining beneath weak lantern glow, hearts galloping. Fathers kept one hand on a neighbor, one on the slick bark of a tree. Mothers bit back sobs and took turns with Cecilia, who stood unmoving a few yards from where she last saw her daughter. She was right here, she repeated again and again, as if saying it enough times might reverse the truth. By 9:30 p.m., the authorities officially arrived. State troopers from Emporium and Bradford, some mounted, others with dogs and handguns at their belts. Constable Frank Williamson took command. A man known more for checking fencing disputes and livestock losses was suddenly at the helm of one of the most terrifying mystery nights in Pennsylvania history. Even he looked lost under the gaslight press of his own breath. We're setting up a perimeter, he told the gathered, trying, and failing, to keep the tremor out of his voice. Nobody goes home. If she's out here, we're going to find her. The searchers didn't need permission. They were already deep in, and growing deeper still. Time snarled inside itself, hours passing like drifting mist, outlines of hilltops evaporating behind the tree line. Some claimed to hear something, a rustle, a whimper, but nothing came of it. Someone shouted they'd heard crying, and 3 men tore up the ravine, crashing through birch and thistle with impossible hope crawling up their spines. But when they reached the hollow, it was empty, only a fox slinking away with glass-bright eyes. Above, the moon held vigil. It cast its light half-heartedly on the scene, silvering the fronds and littered branches with pale indifference. Its cold brilliance, the kind that prompted poets to consider madness, offered no guidance, only a reminder. The world still turned, even when a child disappears. By midnight, the woods had become monstrous. Every tree resembled a figure watching. Every snapping twig in the distance bore the weight of implication. More men joined, some from as far as Smethport and Eldred, each with their own lanterns, fears, theories. Could she have gone to the road? No, there's too much country between here and the nearest stretch of gravel. Was there a car? No one saw anything. No tires. No engine. Speculation ran wild. But it couldn't mask something more chilling. There were no signs of anything. No trail. No clue. A child could not simply vanish, unless she had been taken. By 2 a.m., some had to be pulled away from the trees, their flesh raw from thorns and their minds rattled by the fruitless spiral the search had become. Still, others would not stop. "She's not gone," Sheridan muttered, pacing. "She's out here somewhere." Cecilia sat on the edge of a blanket no one had thought to pack up. Her hands were clasped, not in prayer, but clenched like fists. "She was just here," she whispered. "She was just here. I saw her." And beside her, Dorothea rocked, knees tight to chest, face sunken into the crook of her arms. Each minute became a kind of torture. Each moment her sister remained missing, a gnawing reminder that for all her attempts to keep her close, she'd failed to hold Marjorie's hand when it mattered. When morning broke, cold and gray beneath a curtain of low mist, the volunteers were still scattered throughout the hills. Tired, wet, afraid. But no one had found her. She had vanished into the night. To be continued in Part 7. The forest mobilizes, where the scale of the search inflates, authorities clash with terrain, and quiet questions begin to stir. Could it have been a stranger? Or did the forest truly take her? Morning came slowly, rising through a pale mess of mist and pine sap and heartache. It painted the hills in a cold, iron-washed light, as if the sky itself grieved but refused to stop moving. Down in McKean County, Pennsylvania, dozens of families awoke to the news that had already spread like smoke. Marjorie West, age 6, had vanished in the woods outside Marshburg and had not been found through the long black hours of the night. Radio stations in Bradford sputtered reports. Local churches pulled deacons from their pews to form new prayer circles. Young men abandoned chores, jobs, breakfasts, and beds. Many of them didn't know the West family. They didn't need to. A child had disappeared. That was all there was to know. By dawn on May 9, 1938, the forest was no longer a passive, ancient witness. It had become a battlefield, a living, breathing maze of shadow and green where hope and fear were fighting a war measured in inches and minutes. That morning, the hills of the Alleghenies bristled with more purpose than they'd known since the timber barons carved them to bones. The response wasn't just immediate. It was extraordinary. Lines of men surged toward the woods outside Marshburg, some on foot, others on horseback. The Bradford Era, the region's dominant daily paper, would later describe it as the greatest cooperative search effort the Commonwealth had ever seen, not led by the military. Boy Scout troops from Kane and Smethport arrived on site by 10 a.m., having heard the first bulletins over breakfast. They came in uniform, small, earnest faces beneath oversized hats, some barely older than Marjorie herself. The Civilian Conservation Corps, already stationed nearby for a forestry and erosion prevention project, turned out in full within the hour, hard-hatted, wide-eyed, and solemn. State troopers from multiple precincts arrived shortly after. their boots already ankle-deep in mud as they established a perimeter and began to plan grid patterns. Farmers, garbage men, telephone linemen, students, housewives, all dragged by something primal, some irrevocable magnet, toward the forest edge. At the center of it all stood Sheridan West. He hadn't slept. The last 12 hours had chiseled lines into his face that he would wear for the rest of his life. A man shaped by black oil and honest calluses, now caught in a vortex that strength could not stop. "I need groups of 5, he said at one point, pulling a 40 from raw desperation. "From the brook up to the outcrop, don't miss a single goddamn bush." No one argued. For miles around, the woods were divided and scoured. Human chains began to form, lines of 10, 20, even 40 men and boys, to sweep the undergrowth in unison, eyes peeled, hearts on edge. Each person, each step, a small phalanx of hope and dread. They moved slowly, shoulder to shoulder, heads swinging in rhythm, hands raking back ferns and lifting wet leaves. They checked hollow logs, probed animal dens, peered into crooks where deer lay or foxes might rest. They carried nothing but lanterns, sticks, rope, and the weight of a single question. Where could she be? They left no stone unturned. A lieutenant from the state police arrived and quickly reached for coordination. Using maps spread on the hood of a car, they drew rings and sectors like they were tracing the contours of pain. Circle 1, northeast grid. Circle 2, ridge line down to the stream. Circle 3, whatever's behind Serpentine Knob. Every couple hours, a new team would return, haggard and shaking their heads. "Nothing," they'd say. "Not so much as a hair ribbon." They spoke softly, as if loud words might scare the answers deeper into the woods. By lunchtime, more than 200 people had mobilized across a 2-mile radius. This wasn't just a community effort anymore. It was a full-scale operation. Troopers patrolled trails. CCC men cut new paths through the brush with machetes. Scouts passed water canteens between groups. A mobile field kitchen had even been erected close to the original picnic site, where the half-squashed cake and forgotten utensils still lay, sheltered under a make-do army tent. The little red thermos Marjorie had drank from earlier that day lay sideways in the grass, its shine dulled to gray. What haunted them all was the lack. No blood, no clothing, no footprints that couldn't have been hers or Dorothea's hours before. She had disappeared completely, disturbingly cleanly, without so much as a downward-tugged sock. A state investigator was overheard muttering, "Not natural. This isn't how anybody goes." Still, they searched and searched. Calls again rang through the trees, sometimes in cadence, each line of men yelling in sync. "Marjorie! Pause 2 beats. Marjorie! Pause. Can you hear us?" Over and over. Hours vanished behind them like the sunlight did between the trees. The rocks were the footprints like old skin. The trees received the cries and gave back nothing but their ageless rustle. The Pennsylvania Department of Forests dispatched rangers from their Mount Jewett office. They brought radios and their own maps, suggesting areas too remote for any child to reach, except perhaps one spirited by something beyond reason. That creeping suspicion, something more than lost, began to unfurl like ivy over the entire effort. Everyone was too exhausted to say it, but many were thinking it. What if she didn't walk off? What if something walked in? Dorothea West refused to return home. She stayed huddled with her mother on an overturned fruit crate near a fire barrel, eyes red-rimmed, mouth tight, almost refusing food. When she did speak, it was with a kind of grave certainty. She just wanted to pick more flowers, she said softly. Right by the trees. Only for a minute. Cecilia West, who had not slept either, repeated one sentence for hours, a rosary of disbelief. She didn't go far. She would have come back if she could. Men with axes scoured ravines. Others hammered on hollow trees. One volunteer, an old hunter from Hilltop, led a small group into a once-burned valley rumored to echo even the smallest sound. When he fired his rifle into the air midday, listening for her reply, the single crack rang out and died unanswered, just like the rest. The mountains would not speak. By evening, As day bled back into dusk for a second time, the search expanded beyond 3 miles. Calls had been placed to Harrisburg. The newspapers, already thick with rumors, speculated everything from animal attacks to stranger abductions to drownings in distant beaver ponds. Helicopters were requested but unavailable. A flyover from a biplane was scheduled for morning. The forest was now a creature unto itself, alive with noise and motion, but void of answers. One of the scouts, a boy named Lewis Platt, swore he saw a flash of pink far up the western ridge. His troop ran 30 yards in its direction and found nothing but a patch of trillium. Hope flickered, then faltered. By sundown on day 2, the numbers only grew. Over 500 people had combed the woods. Some volunteers had driven all night from as far away as Erie. Hearing the story on radio bulletins and ignoring frantic spouses to offer help. But still, the wildflowers remained untouched in places they ought not be. Still, the trees gave nothing. Still, the sky watched in silence. It was Sheriff Sanderson who said it first, standing near the base of a dry waterfall, eyes rimmed red. "She's out there," he said, "but we don't know if it's the forest that's hiding her, or something else. Somewhere, just beyond vision and sound, the truth waited." The search would go on, but already, a new question was blooming in the minds of those who trudged through roots and whispers. Was it possible she had never meant to be found? Or worse, was something making sure of it? For days after Marjorie West vanished into the tangled silence of the Allegheny forest, hope clung to color. A single memory held tight in every searcher's mind: a pink dress and a blue ribbon. It was the only thing everyone agreed on. That dress, that ribbon, a flash of pink amid the green wild. In the hours and days that followed, nothing was searched for more feverishly, more obsessively, than those fragile signs of a 6-year-old girl last seen picking flowers, her hair dancing in the spring breeze. By Tuesday, May 10th, 1938, descriptions of Marjorie were everywhere. Her photo, the same one now etched into the collective tragedy of the region, ran on the front pages of the Bradford Era, the Kane Republican, and the Erie Daily Times. The same image made its way to the Pittsburgh Press, and newswires sent it even further. There she was, a sweet, solemn little girl with a face dusted in childhood softness, pink cheeks, and ribboned curls. The blue bow in vivid contrast, like something from a fairy tale. The official description was repeated by authorities hourly, over radio bulletins transmitted across western Pennsylvania and southern New York. Missing child, Marjorie West, age 6. Last seen Sunday near Marshburg, McKean County. Height, approximately 3 feet 6 inches. Weight, 45 pounds. Fair skin. Red hair, curly. Brown eyes. Last seen wearing a pink cotton dress, blue ribbon in her hair, black patent leather shoes. No hat. Carrying a small handful of wild violets. For the searchers, it was all they had. They clung to it like a charm against despair. Look for the dress, they were told. Blue in the hair, pink on the trees. Men and women combed the forest with that one image in mind. In every thicket, they peered not just for limbs or footprints, but for pink fabric snagged on barbed wire, caught on briar, or fluttering like a moth among the ferns. They raked through moss piles and leaf mounds, eyes trained to catch even a thread. They hoped for a sleeve, a bough, a shoe, not because they wanted to find just the clothing, but because finding anything meant she might still be close, might still be saved. Sheriff Sanderson coordinated the effort with growing desperation. "You listen to me," he was overheard saying to an arriving team of laborers from Emporium. "You know what you're looking for. Pink and blue. Light steps. Tiny shoes. You find anything that doesn't look like the woods should own it. You shout. You don't move. We'll come to you." But the forest held nothing that didn't already belong to it. They searched creeks and scrubland, old lumber roads, sinkholes, deer paths. They brought in dogs again, German shepherds this time, and laid out bits of cloth from Marjorie's dresser drawer to draw out a scent. The animals pulled toward the ravine 800 yards northeast, but there was no sign. Their interest faded. Some stood there for 20 minutes in stubborn silence, sniffing nothing. Time erased direction. and the farther the radius expanded, the thinner hope became. Much of Pennsylvania is laced with stories of the land taking what it wants. Hunters gone missing, children lost for days. Some returned, some not. But this was different. Marjorie hadn't wandered into the woods from a yard or a back door. She had been with her family, in line of sight. She had walked a few yards away to pick flowers. And then, gone. If a predator had taken her, it had left no sign. No scream. No snapped branches. Everyone looked. But no one found. The pink dress became the rallying point for anguish across the hills. "We just need to find the dress," one CCC man repeated, staggering out of the brush after 14 straight hours of combing pine slopes. His shirt was torn, his face cut open across the cheekbone. Anything. A bough. A shoe. Anything. But everything was still in place, untouched. The wild violets still bloomed. The sun continued to filter through pine needles. Birds nested. The forest, it seemed, had swallowed pink and blue without a sound, without a trace. At one point, a farmer and his teenage son reported seeing something pink in the fork of a tall maple just off Colbed Road. Excitement jolted through command. Deputies were dispatched. Men raced back up the logging path with ropes and climbing gear. A rifle team followed just in case they found something worse. It was a weathered feed sack, pink from years of sun bleaching, caught 40 feet up since the previous fall. When the report came in over the field radio, someone kicked over a kettle. Another wept. Sheridan West didn't speak now unless told to. His strength became a kind of stillness that scared even those closest to him. He watched with red eyes as horses circled the base of hills, hooves slicing through soft dirt that still refused to bleed clues. Cecilia grew quieter. She asked about the dress less and less. She no longer checked the search maps herself. The image of her daughter threading through violets still floated behind her eyes, and any updates now felt like bruises. Dorothea wouldn't say Marjorie's name. In one of the ravines, a searcher found the remains of a child's toy, a wooden spinning top with red detail flaking off. It was foreign. The West didn't recognize it. The toy was logged, tagged, and sent to state police headquarters anyway. The next morning, another volunteer stumbled on a child-sized shoe perched upright beneath the roots of a burned-out cedar. Two searchers fell to their knees, pulling it loose. It was dark from moisture, but intact. A hush fell over the ridge. The Wests were notified within an hour. But it was too large. Not Marjorie's. Not her footprint. Not her life. The pink dress became not a beacon, but a talisman, symbolic now of something deeper, something that terrified searchers more than any predator in those woods. That a human being, a child, could disappear entirely while surrounded by family, surrounded by open daylight. What force was this? What logic remained? How could only silence and violets remain? And still the refrain repeated. Look for the dress. Long after the third day passed, long after headlines cried out with phrases like "Child hunt rattles entire state," and no clues in West disappearance, the pink dress haunted rural Pennsylvania like a ghost. It was seen dozens more times, falsely. Always it was something else, a woman's scarf, a hunting marker, a lady's handkerchief snagged decades ago. The sightings all wilted, like the flowers poor Marjorie had been picking. Eventually, the description became tired, ritualistic. Every time a new volunteer arrived, they were given a briefing before joining the line. She's 6. Red hair, pink cotton dress, blue ribbon, tiny black shoes. Keep your eyes down. Or sometimes just look for the dress. By the end of that week, an FBI agent was overheard saying quietly to a superior, "We're not going to find that dress." To which the superior replied, "We better, or else we'll never find anything." The Allegheny tops grew greener with spring as the ground beneath remained silent, holding nothing but roots and rock and memory. The shadows stretched longer. The light grew softer. But the pink dress, if it ever had touched anything beyond those first violets, had vanished, dragged along with its owner into some deep silence that no one could locate. Not even names survive in the forest. Only trees. Only echoes. If you still, to this day, walk the ridge alone near Marshburg in late May, It said that sometimes you will see a shimmer of something lilac caught between two trees. But when you go closer, it's only a leaf, only the wind, only absence, throwing its voice. And the search continues. It didn't take long for Marjorie West's name to escape the wooded valleys of McKean County. Within 72 hours of her disappearance, it had crossed county lines, traveled down rural train routes, and leapt into headlines in towns and cities far beyond Pennsylvania's mountain spine. On May 10, 1938, the Bradford Era ran its third edition in as many days, bearing the now familiar photo of Marjorie. Wide eyes, adolescent curls, a smile on the edge of mischief, next to a single relentless headline. Still no sign of missing child in forests near Marshburg. But by mid-morning of that same day, the coverage had mushroomed. Associated Press stories began trickling westward and south through shared wires. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette placed Marjorie's face on the front page. Soon, the story reached as far as Chicago, New York, and Boston, where column inches multiplied with each hour that passed without result. The tone began to shift. What had begun as a regional search was now before a national audience, with all the weight, scrutiny, and spectacle that offered. America was still deeply weary in the spring of 1938. The Great Depression had hollowed its lungs, battered its limbs. The country needed something to feel, to hold on to, something apart from poverty, dust, and diminishing hope. And so it lashed with aching urgency onto the story of a little girl in a pink dress, vanished without a trace in the Pennsylvania woods. Marjorie West, age 6, lost on Mother's Day. No explanation, no sign. It was the perfect storm. Newspapers across the country wrote of the forest that swallowed a child. Syndicated radio programs gave breathless updates each evening. One Philadelphia broadcaster, J. Harvey Lawton, known for his grave delivery, opened his 9 p.m. broadcast on May 11th with the words, "Tonight, the mountains of northern Pennsylvania whisper of something unthinkable, a child gone without a sound. A nation's prayers now rise over McKean County's dark ridge lines." Those prayers did rise, with sincerity, from tens of thousands of Americans moved by the story. Churches held vigils. School children sent letters to officials offering their piggy banks as reward money. One group of 7th graders from a Quaker school in Vermont sent a hand-drawn map with crayon-colored annotations. "Have you searched under the trees? Check logs near water." They believed, quite sincerely, that their imagination might help where reason had failed. But not all attention was pure. Tourists began to arrive. Carloads of strangers from Pittsburgh, Erie, even Cleveland came rolling down into the fold of McKean County, blocking narrow roads in an effort to get close to the story. Some claimed they wanted to help. Most came to gawk. They brought binoculars, packed picnic baskets, and posed for photographs near the woods where the West family had last seen Marjorie playing. Vendors set up outside Marshburg's general store, hawking buttons and copies of newspapers. Cars idled along roads unfit for traffic. A few visitors even attempted to join the search lines. Unwelcome distractions with loud voices and louder opinions. "The city folks don't understand these woods," one local said bitterly. "They think it's something to watch. This ain't a carnival, it's a girl's life." Journalists hounded the West family, particularly Cecilia, who began avoiding the farmhouse back door entirely. Photographers camped beside a stand of maples leading down toward the gravel patch where the old Ford had parked on that idyllic Sunday. A New York Herald Tribune reporter even attempted to follow Cecilia West into church, snapping a flashbulb photograph during prayer. Public sympathy boiled over into obsession. By the 5th day, the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in. J. Edgar Hoover himself issued a short statement confirming Bureau support in the search and encouraging anyone with information, no matter how small, to report it to the nearest federal agent or to the Pennsylvania State Police. 2 agents arrived in McKean County within 24 hours, traveling in a black Buick that stood in stark contrast to the dusty pickups and roadside wagons of Marshburg locals. Their shoes shined, their suits sharp. They began their visit methodically, interviewing the West family, retracing the family picnic, establishing logistics of timing and visibility, conducting forensic sweeps of the picnic area with rakes and evidence bags. But there was little to collect. No fibers, no treads, no drag marks, no blood, nothing that told the beginning, let alone the end, of a girl's journey into the woods. For all its mystery, the site remained eerily unbroken, as if time itself had sealed shut immediately after Marjorie took her last known step. The FBI canvassed for witnesses. They retraced roads through wilderness and questioned every known driver who'd passed through White Gravel Road that Sunday. They tracked vehicle logbooks at service stations as far as 60 miles out. They filed reports on every visitor believed to be in McKean County for the first time in weeks. And yet, the reports led nowhere. That only stoked the nation's imagination. Editorials began appearing in major papers, wondering aloud if Marjorie had been kidnapped and sold. Some imagined she'd wandered into a trail that intersected with an old game poacher's camp. Others whispered darker theories, that someone from inside the picnic group had ushered her away softly, without a scream, and left no trace because none was needed. The country held its breath between updates. Magazines ran slick current spreads about America's vanishing children. Time magazine included Marjorie in a short piece about rural disappearances and the invisible threads between innocence and isolation. In Marshburg and Bradford, the people grew more wary as flashbulbs popped and strangers walked freely through their streets. At night, some left their porch lights on for the first time in years. Inside the West House, silence settled like dust. Cecilia stopped eating. Sheridan rose every morning before dawn and drove the old model past the picnic field, sometimes pausing, other times not. Dorothea didn't ask to go with him anymore. Across America, photos of that pink dress pinned hope like a beacon onto the mind's eye. People painted pictures of what she might look like now, days later, hungry, curled beneath a rock face, or worse, blank-eyed in the arms of a stranger heading west. And behind it all, the still, green forest remained unmoved by sympathy or speculation. The FBI agents stayed a week, and then a second. Reporters stayed longer. But the girl in the pink dress did not reappear. Somewhere beneath the noise and headlines, the real echo persisted, soft enough to be missed by the world's loud grief, but not by the trees. The woods do not answer. They simply continue. Even the stillness of the forest began to shift under the weight of growing suspicion. By the end of the first week following Marjorie West's disappearance, a fog of rumor had swept through McKean County. It wasn't just the trees whispering anymore. It was the townsfolk, the searchers, the crowds gathering in church basements and general stores, all asking the same questions in hushed tones. How does a child vanish in plain sight? Who, or what, could make a girl disappear without a scream or sound? The explanations began to pile up. Some were plausible. Others were tinged with fear, with imagination, with deep-seated worries that something had slipped into the world that no search party could trap. At first, the theories leaned natural, primitive instincts clinging to facts, to the known laws of the land. A bear, someone said, happens quicker than you'd think. If it was a sow with cubs, she wouldn't wait. Fur trappers nodded solemnly. The adults didn't tell the children about the sounds bears could make when startled, how they could crush bone in one strike or disappear into the trees without leaving even claw marks if the ground was soft enough. But then, they'd counter themselves. There was no blood, no dragged trail, no paw prints. Just the untouched violets and soft sprigs of moss where Marjorie had last been seen. Whatever had happened, if it had been an animal, it had acted without mess. Others whispered of a wild cat, a cougar, perhaps stalking the area from the higher peaks. But again, no evidence. Big cats were rare in Pennsylvania, even in the 1930s. Most had been driven out by logging and rifle decades earlier. And besides, a predator that size leaves scars in its wake. So the rumors moved sideways. From predators to prowlers. They called them strangers, and in towns like Marshburg, that meant anyone unknown. One elderly woman told police she saw a gray Buick near the trailhead past McClung's Hollow late that Sunday afternoon. Shiny paint, she recalled. Not local. Man was smoking out the window. Looked like he was waiting. She couldn't recall the plate. Another man, a lumber worker named Clyde Mahoney, mentioned seeing a man on foot near the picnic site, scruffy, thin, maybe in his 40s, wearing a brown felt hat and carrying a pack like a tramp. Mahoney said he waved at the man and got a look like ice in return. A drifter? A hobo? A fugitive? Nobody knew. Within hours, the authorities were collecting descriptions of every transient reported in the region over the previous 2 weeks. Sightings flooded in from all directions. An outsider with a limp, checking door locks in Mount Jewett. A man asking strange questions about church service hours in Corrieville. A beat-up Ford with out-of-state plates idling on Knapp Street with 2 men and a blanket in the back seat. A hunter claiming to have found a clean shoe in the woods, but it turned out to be his son's from last season. Still, there was nothing, no leads, no license plates, no solid evidence. For every suspicious figure cited, there was another explanation. The West had been full of strangers lately, with the Dust Bowl pushing more fearful souls eastward, roads filling with vagrants, washed-up war veterans selling apples and promises out of canvas satchels. Every town had someone who seemed out of place. A week after the disappearance, FBI agent James Reagan held a press conference from a makeshift podium outside of the Marshburg post office. A crowd of nearly 300 gathered to listen, curious if new leads had emerged. Reagan kept his tone clinical. We have received over 180 possible leads. We continue to investigate each one thoroughly. At this time, we have not confirmed any abduction attempt. When asked directly if they believe she had been taken, he responded coldly. We are operating under all possibilities. But the truth lingered between words. There was no ransom note, not a single demand, no phone call, nothing from anyone claiming responsibility, and no signs that Marjorie had walked away of her own volition either. It became a black hole of fury, where nothing came out, and all certainty was crushed. Some townsfolk started quietly whispering even darker possibilities. What if it wasn't a stranger? Some asked. What if it was someone she knew? The warnings curled up like campfire smoke. No one said it outright, but it saturated the air. Was it a family member? A close friend? The postman? A neighbor? People who had once laughed together in church pews now watched each other across grocery lines with narrowed eyes. Mrs. Barnes refused to let her children near the milkman unless her husband was present. Mr. Clausen built a new lock on his barn. Marshburg became a village coated in suspicion. Even Sheridan West, universally regarded as reliable, hard-working, stoic, was not spared the scrutiny. He faced it with an even jaw and silence, but the glances lingered. The question hung there in someone's voice at one point. Why didn't you see her leave? But no one dared ask it directly. Desperation breeds doubt. Locals even pressed law enforcement to investigate Dorothea, Marjorie's older sister. Sheriff Sanderson shut it down immediately, slamming his hand on a map and barking, "She's just a child who lost her sister, not a suspect," before leaving the room. He never apologized for it. With every day that passed and no dress, no trail, no body, the theories began to deform. A local hunter began claiming Marjorie had been dragged into the spiritual realm, refusing to help further unless police agreed to hire a dowser. A self-declared psychic from Buffalo showed up uninvited, insisting she'd seen the girl alive in a vision, though she couldn't say where. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to take the reins of the mystery. Behind it all, reality waited in silence. No theory gave back what they needed, a path out. The investigators gave up on reliable causation. One deputy summed it up best. The girl didn't evaporate, but it sure don't feel like anything took her either. It's like she got pulled behind a curtain we can't open. By the end of the second week, more than 300 suspects had been listed, logged, and later dismissed. No arrests were made. All that remained were the rumors, stacked on top of the other like firewood and burned one by one in supposition, guilty guesses, and hopeless conjecture. And still the forest stood, untouched, answerless. In time, just like the leads, the spell of obsession around the search would start to wane. Not because people stopped caring, but because the human mind can only wrestle the unanswerable for so long before it breaks or turns away. Still, always someone would ask, "Who took her?" And someone else would whisper. Each dawn came like a slow reckoning. For Cecilia West, morning no longer meant breakfast smells or sunlight on the parlor floor. It meant reckoning with another night passed without answers, another calendar page turned in a house grown too quiet. It had been 1 week since her youngest daughter vanished into the forest, and the time between each sunrise had begun to take on the quality of something not quite real. She clutched Marjorie's doll in her hands, small, stitched, worn through at the fingers, its eyes wide with the same blank stare that the townspeople had begun to wear. The doll still smelled faintly of her daughter, of dust, lavender, and wild grasses. It was the only thing small enough to hold. Reason couldn't be grasped. Hope slipped through the fingers like creek water. Cecilia barely ate. Her hands trembled when she tried to pour tea. Her lips moved often, silently, as if she were whispering to Marjorie through a barrier she couldn't breach. She returned again and again to the same place, the edge of that glade, just outside the reach of the blanket where they had all sat together that afternoon. She'd crouch low, smoothing the grasses with shaking palms, eyes darting to the tree lean, as if she expected to see her daughter crawl out of the forest throat at any moment, sleepy and giggling, holding a clump of crushed violets and apologizing for wandering off. But the forest had no mercy. It stood as it had before, tall, unmoved, absolute. People came. So many people. State troopers in khaki uniforms, FBI men in tailored coats, locals in flannels and boots, strangers who arrived only to kneel beside her in the earth and say, "We're looking. We won't stop." Their faces were kind, sometimes too kind, and always unsure what to say when she stared back. When Cecilia spoke at all, it was always the same. She would come if she heard you. Please just keep calling. And so they kept calling. Day 14. Boy Scouts lined up along the creek bed, each one calling Marjorie in 15-second intervals, exactly as ordered. Boots sloshed. Whistles blew. One of them, 13 years old and already long-legged with worry, wept when his troop leader told him to move on. She could be in the brush, he cried, digging with his hands. She could be under here. His mother consoled him in the gravel parking lot of the church, tears mixing with dust on her face. All around them, Marshburg had started to blur under the weight of shared grief. Doors were left unlocked again, not out of trust, but habit. Front porches bore candles that no wind could blow out. A local store kept a sign in its window. "Marjorie, come home. We're waiting." The West family, once quiet and steady, had become a mirror for the town's ache. Their agony magnified everyone's. Cecilia, above them all, felt it first. During those sleepless nights, she walked barefoot across the creaking floorboards of their farmhouse, clutching the doll and pausing sometimes to press her ear to the window, hoping for some sound. A twig snapping, a child's foot on gravel, a voice soft and shy calling for mama. But the only thing that answered was wind. Prayers. There were so many prayers. The churches filled beyond capacity, not just in Marshburg, but in Bradford, Mount Jewett, and over the line into Warren County. Pastors reset their weekly sermons, pivoting to themes of loss, of endurance, of faith tested and not found wanting. People who had never met the West family bowed their heads and whispered petitions into the pew wood, into their hands, into the walls that contained their cries. One evening, a group of Catholic women formed a candlelit circle outside the West house and said a full rosary in unison. Cecilia, sitting just inside the screen door, watched them through the mesh with tired eyes. She didn't move, didn't blink. At the end, one woman placed a pink ribbon on the steps, tied into a neat bow. "We believe she's still out there," she said. "God is good. He'll bring her back." Cecilia nodded. But inside, something in her had begun to hollow. Hope, in its purest form, is not loud. It isn't banners or shouting or deadlines. It is quiet resistance. It is the mother who climbs to the orchard edge every dawn, even when rain threatens and the world has given up. It is the woman kneeling in mud, smoothing wild violet leaves, whispering into a void that does not speak back. Come home now, Margie. I have your doll right here. Searchers clung to that hope too, even as days slipped past with no resolution. But time hardened things. No one said it, but they began to feel it. Fatigue wore commitments then. Volunteers grew fewer. Journalists, once stationed for round-the-clock coverage, pulled their vans back to Pittsburgh and Buffalo. National interests shifted to Europe, where the winds of war were beginning to howl louder. The pink dress was now old ink. There were no new leads. The planes stopped flying overhead. The state scaled back operations. And still Cecilia waited. She refused to take down Marjorie's photograph. She pinned more around the house instead, on the bedroom mirror, the hall, even the fridge door, each one forming a kind of silent constellation. The doll remained on her lap every evening, until her fingers went numb from clenching. Dorothea withdrew completely. She stopped going to school and began to sleep with her back to the room, mouth tight, shoulders stiffened from something no child ought to carry. She blamed herself, though no one could reach far enough inside to pull that blame free. Sheridan walked the ridge line twice a day, never saying where he was headed, never asking anyone to come. And Cecilia, with her soft voice going hoarse from long nights of private prayer, turned back not to the forest, but to faith. She wrote daily letters, to clergy, to lawmen, to the FBI, and once, to the president himself. Dear Mr. Roosevelt, I am not asking for a miracle. I am asking for my daughter. She was only 6, a loving and sweet-hearted girl. She did not run. She would not hide. She would come if she could. She must be kept. Somewhere she is being kept. Please help us find our baby girl. My whole soul is in this. Yours in hope and agony. Cecilia M. West. No letter was returned with a solution, only condolences. One Sunday, during a press interview outside the local church, an elderly reporter from the Erie Dispatch asked her why she still believed Marjorie would come back. Her answer was immediate. Because I'm her mother, and she would never leave me unless something was stopping her. And if she's alive, and I believe she is, then that means she's waiting for me. The reporter printed that quote, word for word. It ran above the fold. For a time, people rallied again. The story flickered across the radio one more time. More letters poured in. But they, like the countless searchers before, could not breach the silence of the woods. By late June, the doll's color had faded from being held too tight. Cecilia wore black more often, but never fully. Never a full veil. Because for her, Marjorie West was not dead. Simply taken. One prayer shy of being found. And every night, before the fire guttered low and her knees creaked from kneeling too long, she whispered the same thing into the shadows of the house. Come home to me now, little one. I love you more than the world has room to say. Mama's right here. I've never left. No answer. Just wind tapping glass. Just the flick of the shutter against its hinge. Only silence. But Cecilia never stopped saying the prayer. For a time, it seemed that the forest had taken everything. Her voice, her laughter, even the sound of her steps. 10 days after Marjorie West disappeared, the mountains offered something back. It was early morning, just after dawn, when Deputy Hal Forrester, a veteran woodsman with 40 years in these hills, spotted them. Footprints. They were small, very small. Delicate imprints in the wet earth just off Ridgeway Logging Road, under a shallow embankment where the slope dipped away from what had once been an old horse trail. The prints weren't fresh, not exactly. They'd been warped subtly, like wax left too long in sunlight. But they were unmistakably those of a child. And more incredibly, they were barefoot. Forrester dropped to his knees with a gasp. We have something, he radioed across the line, though the words nearly caught in his throat. They hadn't had anything real in nearly a week. Now this. Within minutes, state troopers, a U.S. Forestry Service surveyor, and one of the FBI agents, James Reagan, were on scene. Reagan studied the prints in silence. The ground was soft, muddy in patches from the intermittent spring rain that had come in hard days earlier. The footprints trailed along the base of the embankment for 20-some feet before vanishing into a cluster of ferns. For right-facing steps, parallel, thin-soled, small enough to match the description of Marjorie's size 9 black patent shoes, though now, It seemed perhaps she'd lost them. Why would she walk without her shoes? Someone asked aloud. No one had an answer. Rain clouds still hovered over the ridge, and a low mist worked its way through the gullies, as if the forest itself resisted even this smallest revelation. Tom had already been here. The prints were damaged. The moisture, merciless. And then, almost immediately, it happened again. Rain. A slow, steady drizzle began to fall like a warning. There was a scramble for supplies. Cameras snapped, some official, some by local press who had been alerted too soon. Troopers laid makeshift plastic over the visible prints and began canvassing the perimeter with tight, tense urgency. Deputy Forrester tried flagging the track's last direction, but when they followed the line through the ferns, they found nothing. The trail was broken. Still, it felt different. For the first time, the ground had shown a possible story, that Marjorie had moved beyond the picnic site, away from familiar voices, down toward Logging Road 206, an old forestry route that now cut across the western slope of the Allegheny backwaters. It was the alignment of geography, however, that shoved more dread into the hearts of the investigators. Because past that road was the open world. A road meant vehicles, and vehicles meant access. It didn't take long before the theory took root. Had Marjorie wandered just far enough to meet the edge of the woods, then been picked up? And if so, by who? Enter the bloodhounds, again, this time brought in from Erie County, led by a trainer named Russell Coyne, who'd cut his teeth tracking bootleggers to Pennsylvania's coal valleys. He handled the dogs gently, letting them scent personal items. A doll's shirt, one of Marjorie's socks brought down from the farmhouse drawer. The dogs caught wind. They moved immediately, down the tracks, along Ridgeway Trail, through brambles, across a stream, howling. For a heart-stopping 12 minutes, the dogs pushed hard toward the road, ears up, tails rigid. And then, at the very edge of the embankment's curve, beneath a patch of flattened moss near the ditch alongside the gravel, they stopped, not with confusion, not with fatigue, but with finality. They circled once. Saturday, then whimpered. Trail's cold, Coyne whispered. Dies right there. Reagan watched in silence, then spoke 3 words none wanted to say. That's a pickup point. A pickup point. The phrase hit like a rifle shot. It was the worst kind of possibility. Not proof of abduction, but the shape of one. No tire tread. No boot print. Still, in its absence, the scene whispered. She may have reached the road, and someone may have been waiting. That theory, once only a whisper, became the theory among investigators. FBI men doubled their interviews with gas station attendants. A list of registered vehicles near Marshburg was compiled. More alerts were sent to bordering counties, then to state lines. But the search had a flaw. It began 10 days too late. Even if someone had taken her, how far could they have gone in 10 days? An agent from Buffalo, Agent Whitmore, tried lining up sightings with state toll records. Another agent checked hospital admissions and child welfare office logs in southern towns. The post office was asked to report any note bearing Marjorie's name. No leads emerged. Then came the false alarms. A child matching Marjorie's description was allegedly seen in Kane, riding in the back of a dark blue Chrysler sedan. Agents rushed there, doors knocked, diners interrogated, train manifests examined. It was a postmaster's young niece visiting from Harrisburg. Another tip came from an Amish woman who claimed to have spotted a red-haired girl in Smicksburg, chasing chickens in the barnyard with strangers watching from a car. Investigators arrived to find nothing. The girl, again, was local, barefoot, sunburned, and laughing, each thread unraveled beneath their fingers. Still, the prints remained, those small, delicate impressions, now recorded on glass negatives, diagrammed in police reports, studied like relics. Rare evidence, fragile evidence, dying in real time. Deputy Forster returned to the site twice in the weeks that followed. He placed a hand over the earth where she might have stepped. She was here, he whispered to no one. God help us, she stood right here. But even that was an assumption. That the prints were hers. That she had walked. That she was still following her own feet. Because part of the cruel trick was this. No one could prove they belonged to her. The size matched. The direction made sense. But there were no distinguishing marks, no way to be sure. They were tracks, without answers. Just like the whole case. A breadcrumb with no bread. A trail that vanished at the edge of reason. That's what the forest does. In the end, it outlasts. It erases. And all it left the people of McKean County was a stretch of moss, a snapped twig, a shoe-sized dent in the mud, and a road. A road where someone might have waited. A road from which someone might never return. May 18th, 1938. Day 11. The air in McKean County had turned unusually warm for spring. Humid, sticky, oppressive. A thunderstorm lingered somewhere to the south, and the woods crackled now not with search parties, but with insects and the occasional shout of someone who couldn't yet admit the searching was over. Then came the call. Around lunchtime, as Cecilia West stared hollow-eyed out the kitchen window, the house phone rang, sharp and sudden. It was Deputy Hal Forrester, and his voice, seasoned and gravelly from decades in this unforgiving part of the state, was different. Tighter. Focused. He told her gently. A woman in Lewis Run says she saw her, Cecilia. A girl who fits the description. Said she was being led away. It was like lightning flashing across an open field. Hope, so thoroughly dimmed over the last 11 days, surged violently through the West family's veins. For hours, the only thoughts that existed came in this singular fragile form. Marjorie alive. Marjorie close by. Marjorie coming home. Lewis Run, a quiet town carved along Route 219, lay 6 miles southeast of Marshburg, nestled amid sloping woods and collapsed mining roads. It was a town of coal trains and church bells, where whispers traveled faster than locomotives, especially when it came to missing children. The report had come from a housewife named Lucinda Grady, 33, mother of 4, born and raised in that same mountain hollow. She'd walked a path hundreds of times from the post office to her sister's farm nestled off Miller Hill Road. On that dime store gravel trail, near the bend past a decommissioned limestone quarry, Lucinda claimed she saw them. A little girl, no more than 6, red hair, walking between a man and a woman. They weren't holding her hands, but they were close. Close like that. She was barefoot. I think. She looked nervous. The girl wore what Lucinda remembered as a pink dress, though the moment she saw it, her heart leapt so hard she didn't gather details clearly. The woman with the child was tall, she said, wearing a white jacket or overcoat, ill-fitting in the spring warmth, with a kerchief pinned beneath her chin. The man, less distinct, had a cap pulled low and moved as though trying to avoid attention. Lucinda watched them pass, too stunned to speak. She didn't recognize the adults. The girl glanced up at her briefly, then looked down again with visible discomfort. According to Lucinda, it was how she looked at me, like she'd never been more scared to be quiet in her life. The group moved down the slope and disappeared behind a stretch of brush. By the time Lucinda regained her nerve and followed, they were gone. Within 90 minutes, Pennsylvania State Police flooded Lewis Run. The entire area near Miller Hill was locked down. Roads out of town monitored. Alerts went out on AM radio between 5 o'clock and 6 p.m., asking for any sightings of a girl with red hair and 2 unidentified adults in the surrounding counties. Cecilia and Sheridan were whisked into a car and taken to Lewis Run under a cloud of quiet, tense possibility. Cecilia clutched Marjorie's tiny sweater the entire drive. A pale green wool pullover the child had worn constantly that winter. She dared not speak. Hope had betrayed her too many times in recent days. But something flickered in her chest as the car crested Ridge Valley. Faith, or panic, she wasn't sure. For a few hours, it seemed like the story was cracking open. Witnesses in Lewis Run stepped forward. A gas station attendant remembered a tan station wagon, older model, pulling in around noon. A woman in white went inside and asked for directions toward Kane. She had a child waiting in the back seat. A boy walking home from school said he saw 2 adults with a sad little girl near the Methodist church. Someone else remembered seeing that same girl crying outside the mining store, but couldn't remember the day. The leads were fragmented, ephemeral. Then they faded. The car couldn't be found. The sighting near the quarry yielded no physical evidence. No tracks, no discarded items, no fibers. The gas station clerk later admitted he couldn't be sure about the child's hair color. FBI agents swooped in to question Lucinda again. She stood by her story, though her voice trembled more the second time. "I saw her," she insisted. "I know I did. That was her. Or someone who looked too much like her not to be. But someone who looked like her wasn't her." That was the fatal difference. As night fell over Lewis Run, the hope kindled only hours before dimmed, fading like oil from an old lamp. The white coat, the pink dress, the turned eyes filled with silent begging. They drifted into the realm of abstraction, a mirage conjured from shared longing and guilt. Still, the newspapers ran it the next morning. New sighting in Lewis Run, FBI chases lead. But by then, the agents had already quietly folded the file away. They found no vehicle, no child, and no woman in white. Back in Marshburg, the West family didn't say much when they returned. Cecilia sat in silence under the porch eave for hours, the pale green sweater dangling and used across her lap. "It wasn't her," she said finally. "Maybe it was someone else's child. Maybe she wanted to be found. But it wasn't Marjorie." Dorothea didn't speak at all. And yet, something had shifted. For the searchers who had once believed in closure, the Lewis Run episode marked something else entirely, a descent into unknowability. A liminal space where it was no longer a question of if she would be found, but who they were actually trying to find in the first place. Was Marjorie still wandering within reach? Had someone taken her? Or had the forest, in its deep silence, scattered her into shadows so convincingly that even if she stood 1 yard off the road, no one would ever see her again? Later, when talking to a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Sheriff Sanderson was asked if he thought the Lewis Run girl was Marjorie. He answered carefully, "I believe what I saw in those parents' faces. And that was hope. But I'm not sure hope is evidence. Not anymore." In Lewis Run, the wind curled through the quarry hollow. The woman in white was never seen again. And Marjorie West was still missing. By the turn of June 1938, the flowers Marjorie West had gone into the woods to pick had already curled and fallen into the lawn. The violets that once surrounded the picnic grounds browned at their edges, then vanished entirely into the choking undergrowth of mid-season Appalachian wilderness. It was a different forest now, less sacred, more mournful. The search for Marjorie, once frantic and expansive, buzzing with men in boots and boys with lanterns, mothers whispering into the haze, dogs wailing into the wind, had slowed to something quieter and infinitely heavier. The noise was gone. What remained now was a hush, and beneath it, something worse. Resignation. The case was growing cold, not by choice, but by a force more powerful than hope. Time. It moved like erosion, slowly pulling possibility down into the bedrock of uncertainty. The first to fade were the searchlines. In the beginning, they had stretched for miles. Volunteers in lockstep across ravines, atop logging roads, along trout creeks, through endless thickets too dense for light or answers to pass through. But the weeks wore on, and one by one, they did not return. The Boy Scouts went back to delivering newspapers. The CCC teams were reassigned to soil erosion projects out along Highway 6. The FBI agents slowly packed away their notebooks, not because they wanted to, but because there was nowhere left to look. Sheriff Sanderson stood at the edge of the command center on June 7th and watched 4 state patrol cars vanish into afternoon heat waves. No one said the word, but it hung there in the way the tents were rolled, the radios powered down, the perimeter flags pulled from the ground. Standing beside him was Sheridan West, silent again. He hadn't cried in days. Not publicly. His face was leathered by sun and grief, and he stared into the tree line like he was daring it to spit his daughter back out. Beside him, inches shorter but 10,000 pounds heavier in sorrow, stood Cecilia, pale beneath her black ribboned hat, clutching Marjorie's doll like the weight of it kept her from folding into herself completely. Behind them, someone took down the poster tacked to the pine tree at the trailhead. Missing, Marjorie West, age 6. Last seen May 8th, pink dress, blue ribbon, black shoes. Reward $2,500. The sign had swelled and split after a week in the rain. Its peeled corners fluttered like dying moths in the wind. The reward had been Cecilia's idea. Every coin they had, family savings, a bond cashed in, even modest donations from friends and neighbors tired of feeling helpless. $2,500. In 1938, nearly a small fortune. Sheridan had taken the cash to the newspaper office himself. "We don't care who turns her in," he told the editor. "We just want her back." Those reward posters were printed by the hundreds, spreading through the coal towns of western Pennsylvania, into central New York, down into West Virginia, Ohio, Michigan. "Have you seen this girl?" was stapled to telegraph poles and pinned to prayer boards. People tucked them into gas station windows and diners along the interstate routes. But no one came forward. No one claimed the money. There were letters, of course, dozens of them. Pranks, charlatans, opportunists. Some claimed to have Marjorie. Others claimed to have seen her in Chicago, in Dayton, on a train near Syracuse. A woman in Toledo claimed God had spoken to her and revealed the child's location in a field of wild onions. A man from rural Ohio mailed hand-drawn maps that led to nowhere but his own madness. One letter said cryptically, "She was taken to give you silence." It was unsigned. It was discarded. For every page, the West lost a little more sleep. Eventually, quiet replaced urgency. Even Lewis Run, once a boiling point of fury and sightings, grew silent. The chatter dimmed inside the Marshburg market. The church stopped asking for prayer updates. The search base dissolved. The FBI agent in charge, Reagan, returned to Washington with a filing case sealed shut. His official summary simply read: Subject Marjorie W. West, status, unknown disposition, presumed fatal. Further investigation, inconclusive. Case remains open pending new leads. Back in Bradford, the telephone stopped ringing. Inside the West farmhouse, the silence was deeper now. No one said the word dead. It lived beneath the table, under their chairs, in the walls. A feral thought. Cecilia, still dressed in her black gloves and funeral shawl, lit a candle each morning beside Marjorie's photograph and whispered her name aloud 7 times. To keep her close, she told herself. Her plate at the dinner table remained intact for months. One day, Sheridan removed it. He didn't say why. He didn't look up when his wife folded into sobs against the sink. Dorothea refused to speak of that Sunday. As she grew into adolescence, something in her gentleness hardened. She began to avoid mirrors. She prayed into her pillow, alone. In autumn of that year, she would write in her diary, "They're stopping, but I still hear her sometimes. In my sleep, laughing, then running, then footsteps, then nothing." October arrived, painting the Alleghenies gold and blood orange. The trees shed their leaves. The trails grew over. The forest pulled its hush tighter, almost smug again, reclaiming its secret. Hunters passed through, stepping cautiously, eyes lingering longer than necessary on rustlings in the underbrush, always wondering, am I walking where a child once vanished? Fewer and fewer dared answer, but some never stopped. Even 30, 40, 50 years later, searchers would still point to the West case as one of the most haunting in Pennsylvania's history. No signs, no scream, no intel, just gone. Some of them still looked, old men in boots trailing rusted compasses and walking sticks, pointing out places where she might have gone. People who couldn't let go of the notion that somewhere, beneath layers of earth and memory, the forest still held her. But officially, the case slowed to a crawl, then a murmur, then a shadow. The case grew cold, not closed, just unattended. A door that never opened, and never quite closed either. In 1950, on the 12th anniversary of Marjorie's disappearance, a new $5,000 reward was offered anonymously. No one ever claimed it. In the 60s, private investigators tried again, with modern maps, forensic psychology, and missing persons analysis. Their conclusions weren't new. Their findings weren't helpful. There were no usable witnesses. No signs of migration. No bones. Only the pull of something unresolved, stretching on and on. There is an ache to unsolved tragedy, the kind that reshapes an entire region's sense of itself. And for McKean County, that ache never healed. People still talk about the little girl in the pink dress. And though the poster yellows more with each year, and the creek beds change their hum with each rainfall, the mystery of Marjorie West lingers like lichen on bark, quiet, stubborn, ancient. Time, weather, and silence did their best to erode her. But they never quite did. The woods kept their secret. And something in those hills, whether guilt or memory, kept repeating. She was just going to pick some flowers. Years crept forward in the West household like a slow, inexorable tide washing over a shoreline littered with memories and loss. Each birthday passed quietly, the usual celebrations replaced by heavy silences. Candles remained unlit. Gifts gathered dust. Marjorie's absence carved a hollow space in the rhythm of their lives, an echo unfilled. Dorothea, now a young woman, carried her sister's memory as a shadow, always close, ever looming. The weight of that vanished moment, the day Marjorie wandered off, pressed on Dorothea in a way words could barely contain. "I just let her wander off," she whispered one winter night to her mother, her voice raw with the guilt that had settled over her like morning fog. "I should have protected her. I should never have taken my eyes off her." The confession, carried in the quiet room where years of grief had seeped into the walls, was less a burden shared and more a solitary defeat that seemed to define her very being. Though silence shrouded the family, the unspoken anguish was palpable, soaked into daily routines and the spaces between words. Sheridan's once solid frame grew rigid with restrained grief. Cecilia's eyes, distant and glassy, watched over her home like a sentinel guarding a broken trust. Dorothea's lifetime of remorse shaped her path, each step shadowed by the knowledge that she was the keeper of a secret she could never undo. Community whispers and pity circled around them, a cold reminder that tragedy often isolates those left behind, turning family grief into a public spectacle. Yet beneath the surface, the West remained bound by a loyalty forged in pain, each haunted by the same ghost that the forest had swallowed decades before. This was a legacy not of closure, but of perpetual mourning, where time neither healed nor erased, but instead deepened the shadows in which the lost girl's memory lingered, forever a quiet specter in the Allegheny Hills. Long after the desperate search parties had dwindled and the heavy footfalls in the Allegheny woods among McKean County had quieted, a different kind of presence began to fill the darkening trails. Whispers of a girl in pink, caught at the edge between myth and memory. Campers, hikers, and hunters venturing into the Allegheny forest sometimes spoke in hushed tones of a pale figure glimpsed at dusk. A little girl in a pink dress, with a fluttering blue ribbon in her hair, seen darting between trees or standing silently along forgotten, shadowed paths. The stories were fleeting, often dismissed by seasoned woodsmen as trick of light or imagination, but for those who told them, the girl was unmistakably Marjorie. Alongside these ghostly sightings, the case of Marjorie West became fertile ground for mediums, psychics, and self-styled detectives drawn by fascination, grief, or the promise of revelation. Some claimed to contact her spirit in seances held by candlelight. Others reported visions of a frightened child wandering lost among the thick pines. These accounts ranged from tragic to the mystical, and though dismissed by official investigators, they fueled a persistent yearning to find closure, whether in life or beyond. Speculation also grew more wild and far-reaching. Some whispered that Marjorie had been spirited away and secretly raised by a new family not far from her childhood home, perhaps on a nearby farm or behind the facade of a quiet small town, her existence carefully concealed, her identity erased. Others proposed she had been taken to distant cities, lost amid the sprawling anonymity of urban life, abducted, adopted, or hiding under a new name in places like Pittsburgh or Buffalo, never to return to the forest she once knew. These stories, part hope and part haunting, fed the collective longing that the truth might still emerge, giving shape to the intangible grief left by a vanished child. Yet as decades folded into years, the line between fact and folklore blurred, leaving Marjorie's disappearance suspended in a timeless place where history, myth, and memory entwined deep among the whispering trees. For many in Pennsylvania's northern hills, time did not heal the wound of Marjorie West's disappearance. It calcified it. The mystery aged, not like firewood, but like stone, its hardness deepening, its shape unchanged. Like an old scar that no one could explain but everyone could still touch, the case simmered deep beneath the surface of regional memory for decades. And still, the file stayed open. Because every few years, someone, usually someone new, someone younger, someone unacquainted with the forest's silence, would turn to that file and try, once again, to penetrate its shell. To find her. To finish this sentence history had so abruptly abandoned. Those inquiries, quiet, stuttering, persistent, spanned generations. The FBI returned to McKean County in 1953, nearly 15 years from that spring morning when Marjorie West vanished wearing a pink dress and a blue ribbon in her hair. The war had come and gone by then. Eisenhower was in office. America had shifted its worries to red scares and atomic warnings. But somewhere amid boxes of cold cases, a file labeled West, Marjorie, Missing Minor, 1938 found itself on a new desk in Washington. An agent, young, driven, unnamed in later records, read through the brittle case reports and grew obsessed. At the Bureau's request, the Pennsylvania State Police troopers still active from the original investigation were pulled into a brief re-inquiry. Files were unboxed. Maps were redrawn. Town halls were revisited. Nothing new materialized. And yet, in 1955, the Bureau made a crucial shift in its approach. They began searching adoption records. The logic was brutal in its simplicity. If Marjorie had been taken alive, and the cold, clinical phrasing always relied on if, then someone might have raised her. Not harmed her. Not murdered her. Simply taken her elsewhere under a new life, a new name, a rewritten beginning sealed behind bureaucratic doors. Agents quietly reached out to orphanages, private adoption homes, and state agencies across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York. They requested files between 1938 and 1945 related to female adoptees between the ages of 5 and 8, with red or auburn hair, fair skin, and no irrefutable record of parentage. Dozens of cases were reviewed. None matched. Most of those girls were later identified through medical histories or known kin. But here and there, pieces never clicked into place. One child in Buffalo, found wandering alone in 1940 with no name, no past, and limited speech, briefly captured attention. But photographs proved she shared no resemblance. Another child, adopted by a Pennsylvania couple in 1941, had early experiences that didn't quite add up, according to the case notes. Her file was sealed, closed by court order. The investigation quieted again, surviving only in the memories of agents who'd grown used to files without answers. That might have been the end, until the 1970s, when cold case methodology took a new breath with the rise of forensic psychology. In 1976, under pressure from newspapers running a story on Pennsylvania's unsolved murders and missing, the Bureau, now nearly 4 decades removed from Marjorie's disappearance, launched a brief reevaluation under Special Agent Ronald Shiflett. This time, the focus shifted to suspected deathbed confessions. A report surfaced in Greensburg, Pennsylvania about a man, unnamed by the press, but subsequently identified in Bureau logs, who on his deathbed claimed he had once seen a man take a little girl into the hills south of Bradford in '38. That man, a retired trucker, gave no names. Shiflett and his team traced the tip, locating the family of the deceased and recovering an old photograph he'd kept in a drawer. It was dark, grainy, aged, just a utility pole and fields. But something in the angle or the implication caused agents to send it along to forensic technicians. Nothing came from it. The girl, if she was ever in the photo, wasn't Marjorie West. Still, it sparked renewed inquiry, and for 15 months, the case trembled on the edge of traction. Then, silence again. The next push would wait until the 2000s, when advances in digital forensics, DNA testing, and national missing persons recovery databases introduced the idea of solving the unsolvable. The case was now more than 60 years cold. Most witnesses were dead. The forest was different. The trails rerouted. The town of Marshburg had shrunk in population. But the memory, that remained. In 2002, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, released an age-progressed rendering of what Marjorie West might look like in her 70s. The image, while constructed from speculation, bore haunting symmetry to the wide-eyed child in black and white, whose photographs still line the shelves of amateur sleuths and regional history buffs. That image sparked dozens of calls, nearly all false. But one stood out. In 2003, a woman named Anna, whose real name was withheld, came forward in rural North Carolina, claiming her recently deceased mother had, in the 1940s, confessed to taking in a girl from up north who didn't speak for days and referred to herself only as Marty. Anna's mother, she said, had always been vague, cryptic, frightened even. Photos were retrieved. Letters were scanned. The woman's age and hair at that time roughly matched the expected features. DNA testing was quietly conducted. It wasn't her. Hope fizzled again, too distant now to reignite quickly. The Bureau eventually classified the case as archival, but historically open. A technical term for, we aren't looking, but it isn't closed. And yet, despite the decades, people never stopped searching. Year after year, genealogists, armchair detectives, and paranormal investigators revisited the case with renewed purpose. In online forums, some offered wild theories. She was taken by a cult. She was passed into underground child trafficking. She escaped and later changed her own name to disappear from everything. Others clung to quieter, more hopeful scenarios. They said she had survived, raised quietly, not far at all from where Cedar Street cuts east from Bradford's old train station. That maybe she'd forgotten herself, faded into the fabric of another family, erased gently by love or trauma or necessity, and perhaps lived a quiet life, unaware of the people still burning candles she'd never see. In 2018, an independent cold case review group featuring retired law enforcement and 2 forensic psychologists held a panel on the West case at the annual PA Missing Persons Conference. After more than an hour of analysis, maps, and digital overlays of the original terrain, one investigator was asked if the case would ever be solved. His answer was measured. Possibly not. But the girl matters. And sometimes that's reason enough to keep reading the file. Every so often, a letter still arrives at the McKean County Sheriff's Office. A theory, a family photo, a belief. Each one is read. Each one is filed. Each one echoes a single truth. Marjorie West never truly left these woods. Not in heart, not in legend. And if someone, somewhere, alive today once knew a girl named Margie, there's still time. The FBI may have stopped coming, but the forest never stopped listening. And the question still lingers. What happened to the little girl in the pink dress with the blue ribbon? Because even time can't kill a question like that. The trail, such as it was, never ended. It just stopped. The last footprint. The last reported sighting. The last theory, folded into silence like a closing prayer. Then nothing. No body. No burial. No grave to place flowers beside. No bones for certainty. No shoes. No scraps of cloth. No blue ribbon fluttering like a signal from beneath the oaks. Nothing. At some point. It's hard to mark exactly when. The West case transitioned from a missing persons investigation into something far stranger, a phantom story. A fable without conclusion. A real, living child whose name left her body behind and entered a different space. One occupied by whispers, guesses, and unanswered questions that age like shadows in small towns. Even now, standing in the clearing where she disappeared, time seems oddly brittle. You can almost hear the laughter the wind carried that day, the crunch of a picnic blanket being unfolded, the chirp of birds scattering from the treetops. Then, the sudden cut, where sound bends differently, where sunlight stops reaching, where someone remembers the words. She was just there. Generations have passed in McKean County. People who had searched for Marjorie as teenage scouts or young police deputies became fathers, grandfathers, and now names carved into the hillside headstones themselves, each carrying the secret weight of her absence out of life and into death. And still, no one found her. No one found her. Official reports now refer to the case as historic, even in bureau language. Archive boxes are numbered and boxed on federal shelves under classifications aligned with the Lindbergh case, missing Civil War remains, and victims of the Titanic not recovered from the sea. It is no longer a matter of proof, but permanence. The woods, indifferent and eternal, simply absorbed her name. And yet, it doesn't disappear. Not really. Ask around, even now, in Bradford or Marshburg or Kane, and someone will remember her. Someone will say, "Oh, the little West girl." There's always a story. My uncle was on the search team. My grandmother swore she saw her, years later. My cousin says the police never looked at that old house up the ridge. Every few years, someone stumbles on something in the woods, an old shoe, a piece of cloth, an unnatural depression in the moss. And for a few sharp minutes, hearts pick up pace, adrenaline rushes in, and the old hope lights like a match. Then, rain falls. The marks wash away. The cloth turns out to be nothing. The mystery persists. It persists in postcards Michigan tourists send to the Bradford post office asking about tours of where it happened. It persists in faded newspaper clippings folded into historical archives labeled Unresolved Files, 1938. It persists in story time around campground fires, where fathers hand down phrases like heirlooms. Don't go too far in the woods. That's where the little girl vanished. The forest wraps itself in the legend. During autumn, when the leaves fall and the wind turns to a low, dying hum, some hikers say there's a feeling they get on certain trails off white gravel road, as if the trees are crowding a little closer, as if someone is still watching. A cold drop in temperature, unrelated to weather. A sudden sense that you are not alone, not how we usually mean it. They say that's Marjorie's place. The trail near the first ravine, that's where she might have gone. The third hollow near Ash Fork, that's where she could be. The gap between sightings. The missing tire mark. The stranger never found. The theory never confirmed. It all spins together in the county's blood memory, woven into the wild tangles of the Appalachian hardwoods like a story knitted with thorns. And more than 80 years later, the case still haunts. Official reports, both state and federal, remain active in only the most token form. In 2010, Pennsylvania State Police received a letter from a woman claiming she was Marjorie West. She was 78 then, living in the Midwest, red-haired, adopted, and searching for her origins. She'd seen a TV segment that mentioned the West case. For weeks, the local paper danced with excitement. The woman submitted to DNA. Her correspondence was measured, considered. She had no birth certificate until she was 12. Things didn't add up. Neither did they subtract. Tests came back negative. She wasn't Marjorie, just another shadow overlapping old grief. Even then, it became a story. What if she was close? What if the test was wrong? Rumor fills the vacuum, facts cannot. Investigators who studied the case in the 1990s and 2000s often described the West file as uncommonly haunting. Not because the evidence was gruesome or macabre. In fact, quite the opposite. Rather, they were nagged by what wasn't there. No signs of physical struggle. No signs of trauma. No leftovers. No dropped toy. No trail of a last decision. Only a severing. A surgical cut in the thread of a Sunday afternoon. Old-school detectives theorized abduction. Probables placed near the gravel road were studied endlessly. The removed from scene profile. Others leaned toward the wilderness itself being complicit. It was like the world opened up beneath her, said one cold case consultant. And she went where humans weren't meant to follow. And yet, there remains a loyalty to Marjorie West's memory among searchers, neighbors, and descendants of those who hunted for her. No one who looked for her ever truly forgot. The scouts who helped form the initial human chains grew up, keeping their own children closer. The farmers who opened their fields to investigators did it again, decades later, when search dogs returned. The journalists who first chronicled her vanishing past wore notepads down to editors who still, In every haunted October or hopeful spring morning, call the archives and ask, anything new? There never is. Only the certainty that something happened, that something still remains just out of view. In Marshburg, the clearing where the West family picnicked is still there. Different trees, a little erosion. Wild violets bloom in May. Some say they bloom bigger there, where the child was last seen. Some say violets grow better when watered with 1,000 prayers. So the story continues, paused, but never ended. A girl in pink, a ribbon of blue, a Sunday that never came back. No trace, no body, no final breath recorded, no grave dug into the hillside clay. Only the questions, taller now than the trees they grew through, and the quote that lingers at the foot of every file, still pulled out by FBI archivists once a decade, as if it holds the answer. The most baffling and heart-wrenching mystery ever known in these hills. Because this is the kind of story no forest ever finishes. It just waits. Time does not move evenly when grief lives where memory cannot. It churns in ripples, echoes, and ritual, the kind that passes from generation to generation, long after those who first carried it are gone. Marjorie West's disappearance in the spring of 1938 became just such a burden. Not a headline, not a whisper, but a story that grafted itself into the bone of McKean County, Pennsylvania. More than 80 years have passed since Marjorie vanished from the picnic site near the gentle slope of white gravel road, sparkling and shy in a pink dress, flowers in hand, laughter rising into the soft arms of spring. And yet, even now, the mention of her name carries a weight that presses into the air. That girl in the woods. The one who was never found. The one whose mother never stopped calling. In coffee shops along Main Street in Bradford, you can still find those who remember the days when search lines stretched across open hollows and midnight prayers lifted from porches like smoke. Many of them weren't even born yet when she disappeared. But they know. They always have. Because Marjorie's story wasn't just remembered, it was inherited. Her name still has power. It can hush a noisy tavern. Still a turning page in a library corner. Whenever the conversation veers toward tales of folklore or family history, someone inevitably goes quiet and says, in that low, measured voice rural Pennsylvanians reserve for things too sacred or too strange. Let me tell you about the West Girl. A regional haunting. Marjorie's disappearance didn't stay confined to her family. It became a kind of gravity well in the collective imagination of the area. Teachers told the story as both history and caution, reminding children never to stray from sight. Youth groups held brief candlelight vigils every May 8th for decades, organized by the children of the men and women who once wandered the Allegheny Hills holding lanterns and whispering her name. The lessons were practical and spiritual. Stay close / don't wander / don't trust the trees / even the morning can take you. Local poets and songwriters composed pieces that carried her name in syllables stretched across melancholy chords. Artists painted the clearing as they believed it looked before she disappeared. Violets blooming, a burst of pink among the ferns, and sunlight glancing off the glassy curve of a lemonade thermos. In the community's collective dream life, that moment was eternal, right before she stepped into the woods and was never seen again. Even those who didn't believe in ghosts spoke of her like one. Not malevolent, never that, but present, watching, waiting. Some insisted that on chilly May mornings, near the border of the original picnic site, you can feel something move in the air, a hush, a silence that settles into your bones. A small, careful sadness. She's still out here, hunters would say without irony. Sometimes you can feel it. The family legacy. As for the West family, the years after Marjorie's disappearance were not simply endured, they were survived. Cecilia West passed away with her daughter's photograph on her nightstand, and her diary filled with repeated lines that rarely wavered. She would come if she could. Dorothea lived many decades longer. She married quietly, had children, and almost never spoke of the sister she once held hands with in a field full of violets. But trauma doesn't let go. It simply changes shape. One of Dorothea's daughters recalled how, even as an elderly woman, her mother would flinch at the sight of certain trees, especially young trees in tight groups, thin-trunked, casting shadows too close together. She didn't like woods, the woman once said, and she never let us out of her sight. Not once. Dorothea passed away in the early 2000s, having never publicly attended a single press event about her sister's case. When asked by her family, she reportedly said only this: "Some stories never get to end. That doesn't mean they're over." A symbol in the national memory. In the years since 1938, many children have gone missing. Some for hours, some forever. But among the oldest missing person stories in American history, few remain as viscerally alive as that of Marjorie West. Because hers was the first public disappearance of the modern era in rural America, where the mechanisms of 20th century hope, mass media, search teams, citizen support, even federal investigation, were fully deployed. And yet they failed. Marjorie became, in a painfully ironic way, the first case that taught us even mass effort and mass love may not be enough. She was a symbol of how deeply a child can fall through the cracks of nature, history, and memory. A symbol of innocence disappeared, not just into evil, but into something vaster, more unknowable. The woods as a force, not just geography, but fate. The FBI kept her file open longer than almost any case of its type. National organizations like NCMEC and Child Find continued to reference her in training materials long after hope of resolution had faded. She became part of forensic mythology. Even in the internet era, even with Reddit boards, amateur sleuths on YouTube, and dozens of blogs attempting to solve the case, no one got closer than those first few hours in the forest. Everyone who came after was chasing a shadow that had already outrun time. The folk figure. What happens to a girl who becomes an echo? She becomes a warning. She becomes a ghost story. She becomes part of the landscape. There are legends now, some call them campfire stories, about hikers who see a little girl near dusk, standing just between the light and the clearing, barefoot in pink, still gathering flowers. She never speaks. She just lifts her hand, like she's saying goodbye. Then she's gone again, just like she was that Sunday. Some say she is the woods now. Not lost, not waiting, just part of it. Perhaps that's how a legacy should be. Not static, not buried, not quite known. A song sung through pine branches every spring. A question left open to interpretation, long after evidence grows cold. Not as a tragedy alone, but as a reminder that even the smallest step can carry us across a line where answers may never follow. And still, in late spring, when the light cuts differently through the trees and the grasses begin to bloom, someone always visits that field. It might be a historian, or a schoolteacher, or a mother with her own child, holding hands a little too tightly. And each of them, knowingly or unknowingly, becomes part of the keeping. Because Marjorie West never truly left the land that swallowed her story, and southern McKean County never truly moved on. Each year, like clockwork, May 8th returns to McKean County, Pennsylvania. In most places, it's a spring day like any other. Birdsong flickers in the canopies, dogwoods blossom beside rusted mailboxes, and the hills roll quietly beneath clouds like slow-moving ghosts. But not here. Not in this place. Not in these woods. Here, the second Sunday of May comes differently. It brings with it an ache that never lessens, a name that time cannot bury, and an echo that no one has ever answered. Marjorie West. Her name still lives here, not in stone, not even in plaques or statues, but in air and silence. In the thick tree line off White Gravel Road, the story of the little girl who stepped out of sight and disappeared into history floats like morning fog. The forest stands as it did in 1938, evergreen, indifferent, immense. The trees have grown thicker. The soil has shifted. Some of the trails have collapsed into fern-covered ravines. But the story remains. The wild violets still bloom each May. And some say that, if the light hits just right through the branches, and the wind carries soft from the northeast, you can still hear a woman's voice, tired but resolute, calling, "Marjorie, Marjorie, time to come home." No reply ever comes. The forest does not give back what it takes. It never has. A landscape unchanged, a history that moves. Standing in the glade where Marjorie was last seen is like stepping into a story held apart from time itself. The earth feels heavier, the air denser. The colors here, greens more lush, violets more vibrant, shadows more pronounced, feel both too alive and not at all. Each generation rediscovers the case like a myth repeating itself. The child who walked beyond the bounds of safety. The search that spanned valleys, mines, and decades. The clues that never quite came together. What remains is less an investigation and more a memorial encoded in soil. For every new mother who gently grips her child's hand while walking a trail in these woods. For every father who hesitates when his son runs ahead toward the trees. Marjorie becomes not a name, but a symbol. The forest swallowed her whole, one longtime Mashburn resident once told a reporter. But it didn't digest the story. It lets it hang. It lets us remember. Annual vigils and quiet observances. Some families still light candles each year. Others leave flowers in the meadows, violets, mostly, just like the ones Marjorie picked mere moments before she was never seen again. A few locals have made pilgrimages to the site every May for decades. Some say they come for closure, some for connection. Others, though they rarely admit it aloud, come in case she returns. But she never does. Each year, the same scene plays out. Sunshine trapped in the pines. The murmur of leaves. 100 birds singing as if it were any other day. But for those who know, something else vibrates in the quiet. Absence woven into every detail. There is an empty patch of earth near where the picnic blanket was once laid, now covered in soft moss. Nothing grows where the lemon cake was left uneaten. Some say it's superstition. Others say the land remembers better than people do. And always, there's the echo. A sound so slight that only those who truly listen claim to hear it. The distant call of a mother who never gave up. Marjorie. Always in spring. Always unanswered. Always between the trees. Beyond fact, into folklore. The story lives beyond books now, beyond newspapers or FBI files. It lives in soft-spoken conversations, in heirlooms passed between families, faded news clippings, a worn photograph in a silver frame, a doll that might have once belonged to Marjorie's sister. In the town's only pharmacy, behind the register, is a sign that's hung for years. Missing since May 8, 1938. May she never be forgotten. Children who grow up here learn the story alongside learning to tie their shoes, pitch a tent, or walk a hunting trail. In that way, Marjorie never vanished at all. She became a kind of guardian ghost, a reminder of what can be lost, and what we carry even when nothing remains. The unsolved echo. There have been hundreds of missing children across the decades. Some are found within hours. Some become cases closed as cold as the winters that come after. But Marjorie West did something rare. Her story grew with the community. She became fiber in the town's character. And unlike the others, her case doesn't fade with distance. It sharpens. The older the woods grow, the deeper the roots twist, the more unexplained it becomes. It's like she slipped between the stitches of the world, one retired officer once claimed. Like there's a place between breaths, and she fell into it. No grave was ever placed. No goodbye ever fully spoken. Because what can you bury when all that remains is a missing name? The forest remembers. Time can soften hard edges, but it cannot erase true sorrow. And here, in these woods stained by mystery and memory, nothing ends, it just waits. The trees go bare, then bloom again. The violet petals fall, then rise anew. But the story doesn't change. A girl, 6 years old, picking flowers a few yards from her family, winked out of the world. And the world never stitched itself quite right after that. So each year, like clockwork, the forest watches. Unchanging, unaffected, enduring. And if the wind is right, as it is sometimes in May, someone passing through might hear it. A woman's voice, still calling, still hoping. Marjorie. Because the woods remember. Even when no one else does. Final note. Marjorie West. Born, 1932, Bradford, Pennsylvania. Disappeared, May 8, 1938. Age 6. Height, 3 feet 6 inches. Red hair, brown eyes. Last seen wearing a pink dress and a blue hair ribbon. Case status: never solved, never forgotten.